Good evening, everybody, and you're very welcome to the February lecture of the Carlow Historical and Archaeological Society. My name is Richard Codd, and I'm standing in this evening for our president, Padraig Dooley. The February lecture this evening has the title, The Hospitaller Knights of St. John in Carlow and South Leinster from the 12th to the 21st centuries. The Hospitaller Knights of St. John is more generally known as the Order of Malta, and is the oldest order of chivalry in the world. We're very privileged this evening to have this lecture given by Dr. Declan Downey, who holds the LLM degree in International Law from Leiden, PhD degree in Diplomatic History from Cambridge. He lectures in European and Japanese legal and diplomatic history at University College Dublin. Declan, we give you a very warm welcome this evening, and we're delighted that you agreed to present this talk. We just one or two things to mention before we begin. We would ask you to please use the chat facility on your computer or laptop for any questions or comments you may have. And also can I remind you to press the mute button on your computer, and maybe the video one as well. John, you're all happy with that? Okay.
Maximize your PowerPoint.
Sorry?
I'll just Declan might maximize his PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Declan, you're very welcome, and I hand straight over to you.
Thank you very much, Richard. That's very kind of you. And thank you for your warm welcome and for asking me to give this lecture this evening. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the original intention was to celebrate the 65th anniversary of the establishment of the Order of Malta Ambulance Corps unit in Carlow last year, 2020. It had been founded in 1945, and the idea was that it would have been a joint presentation to you, that I would have provided the historical background, and then my confrere in the Irish Association of the Order of St. John, Mr. Tom Hanley, would have presented an exhibition. We planning to mount an exhibition in Carlow, and he would have talked you through the exhibition, various photographs and artifacts, etc., relating to this unique organization and its contribution to society and community in Carlow over the past 65 years. Unfortunately, the COVID pandemic intervened, and we had to postpone the lecture by almost a year. And what we've done this evening is we've divided the event that when ever is possible, Tom will mount the exhibition for you in Carlow, and that so I said I would go ahead anyhow to talk you through the history of the Hospitaller Knights of St. John in Carlow and generally in Southwest and in South Leinster, from the 12th to the 21st centuries, but really we leave the later period to Tom to talk about. I'm going to introduce you first to what is the Order of St. John. The Sovereign Military Hospitaller Order of St. John of Jerusalem, of Rhodes, and of Malta is the official name. Generally, it is known as the Order of Malta, taking its name from the last island stronghold of the order before 1798, when Napoleon expelled the knights and dames from the island. So this is an ancient order that goes all the way back to the late 11th century. And we're talking here about the year 1099, when the Hospital of St. John was founded in Jerusalem. And it was founded by a layman who had taken minor vows with the Benedictines. We only know him as Gerard, or Blessed Gerard. He had been a knight. He had accompanied pilgrims across the Mediterranean to Jerusalem. He may have come from Amalfi, or he may have come from the south of France. It's not quite certain, as both places claim him. But certainly the merchants of Amalfi had put up the money to establish the hospital for Christian pilgrims in Jerusalem at that time. And he was the master of the hospital. And he devised a rule based loosely on the rule of Saint Benedict and the rule of Saint Augustine to guide his assistants, his brothers, in the hospital. Most of these men were knights, and they had turned to caring activity for pilgrims having traveled so far, and some of them may have been ill or whatever, and looking after them in the holy places in the Holy Land. Now, at the time of the First Crusade, of course, he and his men continued their work in the hospital, and after the First Crusade, then they were rewarded with other properties and endowments, and they spread through what was called the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem, First Crusader states. But it's important to point out here that the order is primarily hospitaller, and it assumes a military aspect a little bit later, and this is due mainly to the need to provide protection for pilgrims and travelers in the Holy Land from being captured and enslaved by the Muslims. And this is the reality, that was the historical reality on the ground. So by the year 1113, Pope Paschal II gave a formal recognition to this order. And this is a photograph of that bull of recognition. And it is one of the oldest documents in the world that sets out a formal recognition of sovereignty. But the sovereignty is not applied to an actual territory or tract of land. It's applied to a group of people, an association, an order, or a club, if you like. So it's a very unique document in that regard, because it creates for the first time in international law a constitution that applies the principle of sovereignty, not necessarily to a territory, but to an organization of people. So the order has continued to flourish over the last 900 years or so, and it is well known by the Hospitaller Cross. This is the 8-pointed cross that you see there, following the principles of the Beatitudes. Each point of the cross represents one of the Beatitudes, like blessed are the peacemakers, blessed are the poor in spirit, blessed are the persecuted, etc. And then the 4 arms of the cross represent the virtues of prudence, temperance, justice, and fortitude or courage. So temperance, I suppose, really, it should be moderation in all things, because we're not teetotalers. We know how to enjoy life and good wines and that. So just want to point that out. So the 8-pointed cross, as I say, is the symbol. And there you can see on the screen the extent to which the Order of St. John has spread throughout the world. and in various countries worldwide. And we have over 13,500 members in the order worldwide, 80,000 volunteers, and then there'd be 42,000 then involved in administration and professional assistance. Some people who assist the order in its humanitarian activities, mainly running hospitals and clinics, field hospitals in places of conflict, etc. They, some of them would not necessarily be members of the order, but would volunteer or hire out their services to the order, would be employed by the order. And there on the screen in front of you is one of our primary operations in the world. This is the hospital in Bethlehem, the Holy Family Hospital as it's called, and it is the only place where Palestinian women can have safe maternity care in the occupied territories, and where they are treated properly, treated with great respect, etc. They don't have to go into Israeli-controlled hospitals. So the hospital in Bethlehem is a very old institution, had been re-established in the 19th century, and it is a place that has very close connections with the Irish Association of the Order, because we provide training and support for midwives and maternity specialists as well. And that, so just to highlight that for you. And then, of course, many of you would be familiar with the Order of Malta Cadets and Volunteer Corps, and the Ambulance Corps around the country, where we provide all sorts of training in emergency medicine, etc., to young people, and also to help them develop an interest in medicine, in medical skills, and paramedical skills indeed as well. And also we have various activities, not just only in the Ambulance Corps, for which we'd be noted in Ireland, but we also have sheltered workshops for people with very special needs. And therefore, we provide a lot of support for them, for instance, at Order of Malta operations in Drogheda, where we have this support service for people with special needs. Also, we have Care to Share, which is a place that provides support for carers who need respite, and therefore the people for whom they are caring will be looked after by our personnel, our volunteers, etc., and allows their carers to have a well-deserved holiday. And the summer camp that we have for them also provides a holiday for those young and not so young people who are in full-time care as well. So it's a break for everyone. This is the sort of thing that we are engaged in. And we have recently been involved in the care for the homeless on the streets of Dublin, called the Night Run. And that is being extended to all cities and towns in Ireland as a rollout. And also we have in Galway a very interesting Care in the Community program, whereby elderly people, people living on their own, people who might be a little bit marginalized or vulnerable, are looked after. They're visited every week, they're regular visitations, and our members help them out with any errands or chores they might need, repairs to their houses or whatever, if they need any help with administration matters, that sort of thing, and just providing a listening ear and that important aspect of human contact for people who are on their own or who are feeling vulnerable. So that's the sort of work that we've been doing in Ireland since we were restored in Ireland back in 1934. So there's an image of one of our medieval knights, and as you can see, he is wearing a halberd over his armor, a surcoat over his armor, and that has it's a red surcoat with a simple white cross. That is what we call the battle dress, worn by the knights when they were providing escorts for Christian pilgrims and merchants back and forth across the Mediterranean and into the Holy Land and around the Eastern Mediterranean. And was later, of course, used when the knights had to form a unique naval force in defending the Western Mediterranean against the expansion of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, which brings me to our next aspect here. So there you see the great fortifications of Rhodes. Now, the knights had originally, as I said, been in Jerusalem and in the Kingdom of Jerusalem, roughly from 1099 right through to 1291. After 1291, when Jerusalem had fallen to Saladin, the knights moved to Acre or Acre on the coast up there in northern Israel now. And it's right on the coast, and that still formed the Christian Kingdom of Jerusalem, even though Jerusalem had been taken by the Arabic forces after Saladin. And so right up until 1310, the order operated out of Acre and Cyprus. And I should point out here that we have records of Irish knights and also companions of the order, and I should talk a little bit more about that shortly. These have been people who didn't necessarily enter the order, but wished to be associated with it and its works. And they sometimes volunteered their services and went on tours of duty with the knights in the Mediterranean. And it is in this period between 1291 and 1310 that the establishment of a church dedicated to Saint Bridget of Kildare was established in Acre itself. So we know that Irish pilgrims as well as Irish knights were going to this place at the time, and they had brought the devotion to Saint Bridget with them. I should point out here that we don't know for certain if it were the Irish knights returning from Acre to Ireland who brought relics of Saint Bridget with them to Lumiar outside Lisbon in Portugal during this period of the early 14th century, or whether it was Irish knights fleeing from Ireland with the relics of Saint Bridget at the time of the Elizabethan conquest in Ireland in the late 16th century, whether they had brought them there then. But the fact of the matter is, relics of Saint Bridget are kept in Lumiar, a little parish church outside Lisbon, and had been venerated there. And we know, for instance, that in 1590, Archbishop Edmund McGarren of Armagh, who had been in exile in Portugal at the time, carried the relics of St. Bridget in procession through the streets of Lisbon. So the legend or the story or tradition in Lisbon is that there were Irish knights, Hospitaller knights, who brought those relics to Lumiar. Whether, as I said, they were coming from Acre back in the early 14th century, or whether they were coming from Ireland in the late 16th century hasn't yet been firmly established. So it's just another little link that you have there. So by 1310 until 1523, the order established its headquarters here in Rhodes And when you go to visit Rhodes today, all those magnificent fortifications, towers, walls, etc., and still bearing the heraldic emblems of the various long of the order are still there to be seen in the city. It had been marvelously restored during the 1930s by Italian archaeologists. And that brings me now, ladies and gentlemen, to a point of interest for you. In the archives of the Order of Malta, preserved in the National Library in Malta, Valletta, there is a very interesting reference to a gentleman called Patrick Kelly, described as a familiar of the preceptory of Killargy in the Diocese of Kildare, who had received a commendation from the Order's Grand Master Pierre d'Aubusson in 1479. And that was for over 7 years of worthy service to the Order of St. John on the island of Rhodes, and earlier at the Order's Castle of St. Peter in Bodrum on the Anatolian coast. If any of you have gone on holidays to southern Turkey, to Bodrum, that marvelous castle that you see there in the center of the harbor was built by the Knights of St. John, and Patrick Kelly, connected with Killargy there in Carlow, had been there. So Kelly received his commendation a year before the first Turkish siege of Rhodes from the 23rd of May to the 17th of August, 1480. Now, we don't know whether he died during that siege or whether he lived on. Thus far, we've not been able to discover any more information about Patrick Kelly, but this vignette reveals the unexpected involvement of a Gaelic Irishman connected with this place in County Carlow in the activities of the Order right at the heart of its international headquarters at the time in Rhodes. And earlier, we know he had served at Bodrum, right on the frontier facing the Ottoman Turks. Now, it's not until 1523 when Bodrum fell to the Ottomans, but it's an interesting vignette, nevertheless, that gives you a sense of how in medieval Ireland, someone of Gaelic origin could have such a cosmopolitan career. And he was connected with Killargy. So as a familiar, it meant that he wasn't an actual knight of the Order, but a companion or a volunteer with the Order, and had some form of formal connection with the preceptory of Killargy. Because in the files, anyone who comes into the service of the Order or is connected with the Order, their preceptory or their commandery, the local house to which they had come into contact with the Order and were received into either membership or association with the Order, is given. So this is one of the earliest examples we have of an Irishman being involved with the Order's international operations. And as I said, he is of Gaelic origin. This will give you an example of one of the tower houses on Rhodes where he would have been connected. Perhaps he might have done duties there, etc. Or he may have actually said fought in the first siege of Rhodes the following year. But as I said, I have used that word connected, unexpected, as most traditional narratives about the Sovereign Hospitaller Order of St. John in Ireland, they tend to identify it as an exclusively English or Anglo-Irish institution. And this perception has its origins in the association of Maurice de Prendergast, who was master of the Order's hospital in Kilmainham from 1201 until 1210, with his first arrival in Ireland with 90 archers and 10 men-at-arms at Bannow Bay on the 2nd of May, 1169, and who then went on to join Diarmid MacMurrough, the King of Leinster, and Robert Fitzstephen at the siege and capture of Wexford that month. So Maurice de Prendergast as I said, it's because of him that the order is connected traditionally with the Norman arrival. However, we need to bear in mind that there is some evidence to suggest that Maurice de Prendergast at this time was actually not a knight of the order. Indeed, we know that Maurice de Prendergast refused to attack Donal Mogilla Padraig, the king of Ossory, and that both men had actually known each other previously as pilgrim companions of the Order of St. John in either Compostela or Rome or in the Holy Land, because there is reference to them having done pilgrimage together, and hence the mutual swearing of fraternal oaths on the relics of St. Molling, which were kept in the old church there at St. Mullins in Carlow, which you see. So the Maurice de Prendergast, as I said, is interesting for us because recent historical scholarship and analysis, most notably by Helen Nicholson, Paolo Virtuani, the late Niall Byrne, and the late F.X. Martin, has established that there is no evidence to suggest that Prendergast was a member of the order at the time of the arrival of the Normans at the invitation of the King of Leinster. The two surviving primary sources that provide contemporary accounts of the Normans' arrival and their activities, Giraldus Cambrensis Expugnatio Hibernica, written from a Norman perspective and completed in 1189, and Maurice O'Regan's Le Chanson d'Erme et le Comte, the Song of Dermot and the Earl. Now, O'Regan was King Dermot's secretary and interpreter. He was quite fluent in Norman French. And he did not mention, neither Giraldus Cambrensis nor O'Regan mentioned the presence of Hospitaller knights among Strongbow's forces. And neither call Maurice de Prendergast Fra or brother, which would have been his correct title as a professed knight of St. John. As Paolo Virtuani has demonstrated, Prendergast most probably took the vows of a Hospitaller knight sometime after 1169. But it is one of those curious questions that we are still trying to find out more about, and that is the matter of Prendergast and his earlier connection with the King of Ossory. So some of you might have some ideas on that, but we're open to hearing what they are. Now, the first recorded mention of a Hospitaller knight by name in Ireland is in a deed dated to 1177 that was witnessed by Archbishop Lawrence O'Toole of Dublin, and it refers simply to Ralph the Hospitaller. So when we look at the early foundations, most of them are concentrated in the area of South Leinster and Munster. There's only one foundation up in the Ards Peninsula by Hugh de Lacy, and there is none at all in Connaught. So Richard de Clare, alias Strongbow, had donated Kilmainham around 1174, and Walter de Lacy had donated Kilmainham Beg in County Meath shortly afterwards. Maurice Fitzgerald donated Kilteal. Alexander de St. Helena, or some sources record Richard de Cogan, donated Mourne Abbey in North Cork, while William Marshall, or Guillaume le Maréchal, donated churches of St. Patrick, St. Bridget, St. Mary Magdalene, and a hospital in Wexford, and the Church of St. John outside the walls, and the property at Ballyshaug, identified by Billy Colfer as Ballyhogue. And the Roach family donated the former Augustinian house of Saints Peter and Paul to the Hospitallers, who renamed it the Abbey of the Holy Sepulchre, Selskar Abbey. And in 1196, Gilbert de Boreard donated Killerrig, or Killergy, in Carlow. I know that there are some traditional historians who think that it had been a Templar property, but that's not quite the case. The Registrum for Kilmainham and other sources tell us that it was actually the Borear donated it to the Hospitallers in 1196. But the confusion with the Templars might arise a little bit later, after 1314, when the Templar property of Ballymone was granted to the Hospitaller Preceptory of Killargy for the sum of £400 paid up front to the royal treasury. And the Geoffrey de Marais, or Geoffrey de Marisco, as he's sometimes called, he had donated the properties at Ainey in County Limerick and Ratu in North Kerry to the order. So these are the early foundations, and as you can see, most of them are in the southeast and in South Leinster. And this represents, as I said, the close connection with the arrival of the Normans, many of whom would have given these properties, as was their tradition, as a thank offering. But also, it's important to bear in mind here that the King of Ossory, Magilla Padraig, had also made donations and endowments to these houses set up by the Normans. And we know from early accounts that not all those who were admitted to the order as knights were exclusively English, or of English origin, or of Norman origin indeed. Quite a few Gaelic names also appear. And as you know, the name like Fitzpatrick, or like the name Magilla Padraig, under the influence of the Normans, became Fitzpatrick, or son of Patrick, Fitzpatrick. That's an important point to bear in mind, just like the the Norman family of Fitz-Eliot became Mac-Eliot. So bear in mind again that phrase that the Normans became more Irish than the Irish themselves. Indeed, that happened, but also many Irish adopted Norman culture too. And what you have in medieval Ireland, particularly in Munster and Leinster, is the emergence of a new Hiberno-Norman culture and society. And French would have been spoken right up until the late 14th, early 15th centuries, not English. And we'll be coming back to these points again. I'm just going to move on here. This is the arms of the Irish Association of the Order of Malta in Ireland. And this dates from back to 1934, when the order was re-established here, having been dissolved initially in 1541 by Henry VIII. And what you see here are, in fact, you have the 8-pointed cross above, but underneath you have the cross of St. Patrick, the Irish flag, the old Irish flag, and you have the sword and the lamb representing St. John, behold the Lamb of God, and the sword with which he was decapitated on the whim of Salome. And so the arms there, the sword, the lamb, and the cross salter of St. Patrick, this was taken from the seal of Roger Outlaw. Now, Roger Outlaw of Kilkenny is one of our most famous characters in the history of the order in Ireland. He flourished between the years 1260 and 1341. But by the year 1317, when he became prior of Kilmainham. He had been appointed to Kilmainham, having held previously the priory of Downey in County Limerick, or the commandery or preceptory of Downey, I should say, and the hospital there, and also the preceptory of Killargy in Carlow. Now, Roger Outlaw was famous for being a very astute Lord Chancellor of Ireland and Justiciar from 1321 until his death 20 years later in 1341. But more so, perhaps, for being the brother-in-law of Dame Alice Kettler through her first husband, the famous Dame Alice who provoked the witch trials in Kilkenny there in the early 14th century. Now, as you know, Bishop Richard de Ladreed was one of these English Franciscans who had been appointed Bishop of Ossory at the time, and he was obsessed with the witch craze and witchcraft. Most unusual for a Franciscan, but there you are. And he was convinced that Dame Alice had been practicing sorcery and witchcraft and the dark arts. And well, you know most of the outline of the story and the trial, etc. But she was shielded and protected by her brother-in-law, Roger Outlaw. And he managed to help her to escape from Ireland as well. And for this, Bishop de Ladreed accused him of heresy and attempted to pronounce an excommunication upon him. But of course, it was pointed out to the bishop that a knight of St. John cannot be excommunicated by a bishop or a priest. That's reserved only to the Pope. So that was the first point in his favor. And then the second point in his favor was that on the accusation of heresy, he demanded that an independent commission would be set up to investigate the bishop's claims. And of course it was, and it found that there was no case to answer by Roger Outlaw. And so he survived, and the bishop had to go with his tail between his legs to his grave. So the arms were chosen in 1934 to represent the Irish Association in honor of Roger Outlaw. But again, he is one of those whom we know had a connection with Killargy before his appointment as Prior of Ireland and of Kilmainham, Master of Kilmainham. Now, we also know in relation to Killargy that in the year 1314, as I say, it had been given the former Templar property of Ballymoon, so that was attached to it, and that brought in a serious income. And then in 1326, we know that Fra William de Tiselden was replaced as preceptor of Killargy by Fra William de Findrum, Fiondrum, and a Gaelic name. And this is, again, one of those little fragments of history that we have that gives us an insight. But we know that Killargy, like many of these houses, preceptories around Ireland, catered for lepers. There was a Lazar house attached to it, and care for the lepers was one of the distinguishing features in the medicine of the Knights of St. John, not just only in Ireland, but right throughout Europe and into the Middle East. And they would have, we also know that they had various salves on offer for the sores of the lepers to ail their pain. And also we know that they had provided general medical advice and assistance to people in the localities as well. But in terms of running major hospitals, of the 129 houses in Ireland during the Middle Ages, the main hospitals were at Kilmainham itself, and in Wexford, St. Mary Magdalene, Waterford, St. John's, and in Limerick, St. John's, and also in Limerick at Downey, which the modern town of Hospital in East Limerick also takes its name. So there is a group of our Irish Association at the hospital in Downey, and you can see there an effigy. This is where where Roger Outlaw was buried, actually, entombed there. And this will give you an idea of what the interior of a hospital would have looked like run by the order. And you see each bed has its own canopy over it. And the beds usually faced opposite each other in a well-aired building. Usually there's an altar at one end so that they can observe Mass being celebrated and receive the sacraments. But on the instructions and the rule of the order, patients had to be served food from silver vessels. Their bowls, their goblets, etc., were made of silver. The knife or the fork or the spoon that they would have been given to use would also have been made of silver. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is because silver has a natural antiseptic quality in it. So again, you see here the knowledge, medical knowledge about infections and hygiene, etc., and in the service of the poor and the sick, which is the motto of the order, the obsequium pauperum, tuitio fidei et obsequium pauperum. So maintenance of the faith and our witness to the faith, or protection of the faith, and observance of duties to help the sick and the poor. And so, as I said, the preceptories, their functions mainly, as I said, were to provide local medicine dispensing pharmacies, if you like, to the locality, but also to provide help for lepers in the locality, the Lazar House. And also, they had another function, and that was to raise money from their lands, their farms, or their plantations, because we know the Knights of St. John also had plantations, because some medieval records tell us that up to 4,000 or even 6,000 English pounds sterling at the time would have been accrued from the export and sale of timber from the carefully maintained plantations. And that so also most of these sales would have gone to Spain and Portugal, where there was a shortage of timber. So that's one of the things. And this is a point that was also raised in the 16th century in an outline of reasons why Philip II of Spain might aid the Irish Confederates seeking his help to expel Elizabeth I and her minions, the Tudors. So again, these little snippets of information give us insights into the socio-economic and political life in Ireland at that time. And again, many of the Irish priors, the priors of Ireland, were independent of England. They were not subject to the priory of England. That's another myth. They directly dealt with the Grand Master and convent in Rhodes, Jerusalem, and later on in Malta. So there is an example, for instance, of the Council of State in session with the Grand Master, Raymond de Puy. And we know that various Irish priors like James Keating or Roger Outlaw particularly, and Peter Larchet were regular visitors to the order's headquarters and had done tours of duty as well at the order's outlying fortresses protecting the boundaries of Christendom. Like, for instance, here you have the great Crac de Chevalier in Syria, or this other view of the Crac gives you an example. That's the interior of the hospital wing of the Crac. You can see where they had ventilation there. It's an important aspect of it. And it's another view, the cloisters in the Crac itself. And so we come towards another dimension in the history of the order. And let's see, now it's 10 to 9. By 15, as we know, in medieval Ireland, the order did flourish. And as I've given you some insights there into what was going on in Carlow and in the east of the country. But by 1541, Henry VIII moved against the order. He had already dissolved the other religious orders before then. The Order of St. John, the Hospitallers, was the last order to be dissolved. So what happened was that in Ireland, Prior Rawson and others like Andreas O'Heffernan at Ainey in County Limerick and Robert Wise in Waterford, they had sold long leases at low rents to their relatives, their friends, thereby preventing the Crown from seizing those properties. And that meant that certain aspects of the hospitaller role, running the clinics or the hospital services, could continue under private patronage. So the spirit lived on in that way for a period until Edward the Sixth put a stop to it ultimately in areas under his control. However, the Priory of Ireland continued abroad in exile. And that would be the subject of another night of a lecture, but suffice it to say that between 1550, the middle of the 16th century, and the Confederation of Kilkenny in the 1640s, many Irish people went to join the order abroad, and particularly in the Castilian Long in Spain. And Philip II reserved places for people from Ireland in the order's houses in Spain. And we know that titular Grand Priors of Ireland were also appointed at the behest of the Spanish king right through the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. So various Irish refugees who arrived in Spain after the fall of Kinsale, the defeat of Kinsale in 1601, 1602, for instance, were received and helped by the Irish Knights of the Order in Spain, as well as by the Spanish Knights. And they found commissions for them in the Spanish naval forces, etc., and also helped to establish the Irish College in Santiago de Compostela under Philip O'Sullivan Bear as a lay college. And that continued in the early years until the Jesuits got their hands on it and turned it into a seminary. That's another story again. But what I'm highlighting for you here is the role of the order in helping the Irish abroad at this time. Going into the Confederation period of the 1640s, the Archbishop of Cashel, Thomas Walsh, who was a native of Waterford, was actually ordained as a priest in the Order of St. John. He was a hospitaller knight, and then he took full vows in priesthood as well. And he established a hospital in Limerick during the Cromwellian siege of Limerick in 1651-52. And he was imprisoned afterwards. He was captured in Waterford and imprisoned there, and then sent into exile to Spain. And he died in Santiago de Compostela, where he is buried in the cathedral there. Later on in the 17th century, during the Williamite Wars, 1689 to 1691, many Irish knights in the Spanish service and in the French service returned to Ireland to help. And we know that King James II's illegitimate son, who was Henry, given the title of Grand Prior of England, he had raised a regiment in Ireland known as the Grand Prior's Regiment, and they gave distinguished service in both sieges of Limerick, 1690, 1691. And again, during the bombardment of Limerick by Ginkell's forces, the Viscount Clare, Daniel O'Brien of Carrigaholt, had written to Louvois, the French Minister of War, outlining conditions in Limerick, and gives thanks for the Hospitallers and their work in Limerick during the siege. So we know that they had been there. So there was always that connection maintained. Then going right through the 18th and the 19th centuries, many Irish people who wanted to engage with the order went abroad and joined the order abroad, primarily in France, in Spain, in Portugal, and some in Austria as well. And of course, when it comes to the expulsion of the knights from Malta itself by Napoleon in 1798, one of those young Irishmen who had become a Knight of Malta in Austria swore vengeance, and he got it. His name was Laval Nugent from County Westmeath, and he drove Napoleon's forces out of the Balkans and out of Italy. He liberated Venice from the Napoleonic forces, liberated Rome as well, and Naples, executed Murat, and he returned the Pope from his exile to Rome. And for that, he was made a Roman prince, but also when he was asked, was there any particular honor he would like, he requested to be made titular Prior of Ireland in the Order of St. John. So going forward into the 20th centuries, the order, as say, had continued to flourish. It regained after the Napoleonic period in the late 19th century, and by the First World War, the order was running field hospitals in areas of conflict, and there you see one of their operations in the Second World War, dealing with refugees, etc. As I said, the hospital in Bethlehem is one of our major works. During the Balkan Wars in the 1990s, we had set up field hospitals in Kosovo, etc. We had them in Myanmar, Burma as well, dealing with the Rohingya. And the reason why we're able to go into conflict zones is because we're a sovereign order. We're an independent sovereign state in international law. We're not aligned to any political group, and therefore we're trusted as being neutrals. And because we have diplomatic passports and status for our staff, etc., we're allowed into areas of sensitive conflict where we can bring humanitarian relief to the people who are suffering. And there you see one of our hospital trains as well, and clinics all over the world, in Africa and South America. And in Europe, our work with the people with special needs, and bringing them a little bit of fun, as well as giving them medical care and attention, and also providing help for young people in deprived areas, particularly providing educational and recreational facilities for them. And that there's one of our our service users based in Panama, I think. And this is in Ireland, where we bring some of our friends to enjoy a little spin around a racetrack or whatever. Here we have food kitchens, Belgium, for instance, and laundry facilities and helping people out generally. As you can see, this is the sort of work that the order continues to do after 900 years, and bringing people on pilgrimages to Lourdes and places as well. It's an international order. It always has been. Runs these international youth camps as well, and we're hoping to have the next one when circumstances permit here in Ireland. So it's all ruled by the central governing body, the Council Complete of State, and the headquarters in Rome now, the Via Condotti, and there it is there, the courtyard. And if you're looking for a trick question for your next pub quiz, you can ask, apart from the Vatican, what is the other enclave in Rome? That will have them flummoxed. It's the Order of Malta, Sovereign Order of Malta. They have the Via Condotti and the Magistral Palace there on the Aventine Hill. So there's another view from it. So there you are. And the order still produces its own stamps and coins as well, and even produces a wine. This as a Magione, and again, it's young people with special needs who benefit from these enterprises. They're taught how to make wines, etc. They're made self-sufficient. They can given help with marketing and all of that sort of thing. So it's all goes back to these events in Jerusalem and Rhodes, etc. And of course, Malta, there you see Valletta itself, the Grand Harbour, which in 1565 put up a great stand against overwhelming odds. And in combination with the Great Siege of Malta, 1565, and the Battle of Lepanto 6 years later, you have the breaking of Turkish naval power in the Mediterranean and saving Europe from Islamic domination back then. That's another view of the Grand Master's residence in Malta itself, the Castel Sant'Angelo, which the Maltese government very kindly returned to the Order of St. John some years ago, and it is used as an international study centre for the order itself. And these are some views of the Siege of Malta, and one of the great knights. It's Caravaggio's portrait of one of our knights, and there's the Grand Master Pinto de Fonseca, Portuguese, and of course the Code Rohan is based on the code of this Grand Master. And as you can see, we even have ladies, dames, who provided hospital services, running the hospitals in the order as well. So that's St. John's Co-Cathedral in Valletta, where many of our Grand Masters are buried. That's a contemporary view of the Siege of Malta itself. There you have it. And even today, our volunteers and our members are working with refugees stranded in the Mediterranean and helping out with rescue services, etc., and providing medical assistance to those poor, unfortunate people. And because we have a great sense of tradition, we have various ceremonies to mark events, etc. And this here is the Spanish Association of at Segovia, holding St. John's Day celebrations there in June 24th. And our French brethren, they have their celebrations at Versailles itself, such as the high regard in which they are held even by secularist governments like in France, that they're allowed to hold their celebrations in Versailles National Monument. And it all goes back, ladies and gentlemen, to this man, Gerard, and the vision that he had back in the late 11th century and in setting up his order in 1099 and caring for the poor and the sick. That's at the heart of what we do. And I'll leave you with that final shot. Where would you like to be? And on that point, ladies and gentlemen, I'm happy to take your questions. We're within the hour. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Downey. That was a most interesting lecture. I'm now going to ask John Kelly to maybe manage any questions or comments that may come in.
We've only one question so far, so people can still contribute. Just use the chat button at the bottom there. You can see it in the center of the screen at the bottom, chat. But this is an interesting question from Charles Glenn. And he says, in the area of the former Kingdom of Aragon, he's encountered many former Templar properties ceded to the Hospitallers. And he asked the question, isn't it true that the papacy facilitated or encouraged this to keep them out of the royal hands?
Yes. Yes, that's true. The papacy did encourage that because, as we know, the French king, Philip the Fair, had led the charge against the Templars, and his behavior was absolutely reprehensible. And of course, he didn't want to pay the debts that he owed them, so accusing them of heresy and having them dissolved, etc., using political influence at the time, put pressure on the Pope. That whole business was a great scandal. I think the successive Pope realized that and was anxious to prevent Templar properties falling into the hands of the secular powers and not to have a repetition of what had happened in France. So in Aragon, in Castile, in Portugal particularly, and even here in Ireland as well, many of the Templar properties were transferred to the Hospitallers. So now the Templar properties did not run hospitals, and the Templars were exclusively an order devoted for military defense and purposes. But the Hospitallers had a social side. They were providing social medicine. They were providing care for the vulnerable in society. And it's because of that that they have survived intact for 900 years. They're not associated with political or aggressive materialistic purposes. And that's why they've had that respect and regard and have been able to pursue their role independently. But yes, in Portugal, the Templars didn't transfer all their properties to the Hospitallers. They actually transformed themselves into a new order called the Order of Christ. So they just merely continued in that way. And again, a matter of interest for an Irish audience is that one of the earliest manuscript copies of the Navigatio Sancti Brendani, or the Navigation of St. Brendan, was preserved in the library in Tomar, which was the headquarters of the Order of Christ. It had come into their possession originally from the Templars. And that was the copy that Christopher Columbus had read when he was doing his research on looking at what the ancients had to say about sea routes to India. So that's a little point you might like to bear in mind as well. But yeah, I hope I've answered and elaborated on your question there. Thank you.
That's great. We have another question. How is the order financed?
Well, number one, members of the order pay an annual fee. And also, when someone is admitted into the order, they pay their passage money. So that would be about double the annual fee. And so the passage money goes to Rome, and then they have their membership fee within the association itself. So every year there's roughly a divide, 50-50 of the fees go to Rome to support the international organization and its works, and the other goes to support the Irish Association and its works locally. Then we also have a number of endowments and bequests over the years that have built up a fund, and we have then various services like for instance, in the ambulance corps, there are training sessions there for, say, companies and firms that need to have health and safety officers. So in that area of basic emergency medicine, for instance, how to use defibrillators, how to do first aid, etc. So we have training sessions for that, and that earns a little bit of money for the order. And also at events, sporting events, rugby matches, football matches, horse racing, etc. around Ireland, the local ambulance units are actually often asked to provide services as well, and there's a little honorarium given for their expenses too. So, but when you're dealing with an order as old as ours, over 900 years, and having survived various vicissitudes, etc., there is a little bit of what we'd call old money there. There's a little bit of, serious endowments over the years to build up, and then also governments around the world often call on our assistance, and likewise the United Nations, particularly in areas of conflict. So they also provide funding for our charitable activities in the form of whatever donations or charitable grants that they would make. They include the Order of Malta as well. Does that answer the question?
I think so. And we have a related question to it from Kevin Murphy is, what way is the order structured in Ireland from local to national level?
Okay. We have our headquarters at St. John's House in Clyde Road in Dublin, and that's where the Presidential Council meets every month. It's where the Chancellor, who runs the day-to-day running of the order, ably assisted by the CEO and office staff there. So there is the President, Vice President, Chancellor, Treasurer, Hospitaller. And these are the offices. And then there's a council assisting them, of elected members. Every 3 years, there are elections where the members gather in Dublin, St. John's Day, celebrate the feast of the patron with a mass, and then there's an AGM, and every 3 years, there's an election of a new council. And then there's a feast of St. John that night. So that's how we have that. Around the country, then there are individual members living, and they might be involved with local ambulance corps or local charities run by the Order of Malta as well. Now, to be a member of the order, you do not have to be a member of the ambulance corps first. And that's a point I'd like to get across. There is a mythology out there, oh, you have to be in the ambulance corps to become a knight or a dame of Malta. That's not true. Yes, it can help if you have been involved with the ambulance corps in some capacity, but you can be involved in helping the order in a volunteer capacity in any other way. So, for instance, I'd become involved in terms of fundraising for the order, etc., and helping out, and then I was invited into membership. But people who are invited have to, number one, be practicing Catholic. Number two, they have to have an understanding and commitment to what the order is about, have a sense of compassion for their fellow man or woman, and also to have some level of distinction themselves in their own career, in their own lives, etc., that they have obtained some degree of recognition and merit for their work. And that so looking for solid people. We're not looking for holy Joes either. We're looking for people with a sense of humor. And we certainly don't encourage fanatics. I'd like to make that very, very clear. So as I say, we're open, and people are interested. We'd be very happy to supply further information to them. It's available on our website, and also to contact the Chancellery itself in Clyde Road, Dublin. And if you know of events connected in your locality, for instance, the Ambulance Corps celebrate usually St. John's Day and the raising of the siege celebrations in September, you might like to come along to those events as well. But you'll be very welcome to contact us, and we will provide you with information. And we're actually considering even having an open day as a means of engaging with people to let them know what we do. So there we are.
One question to finish, and it's a Carlow-based question, probably more a comment. And it's from Tony, and he says about when you mentioned properties being transferred when the Templars were suppressed, and you spoke about the Ballymoon in Carlow, and it just commented that's very interesting. Now, there's been an association in the past with Ballymoon Castle and the Templars, but I think that's been at this stage that's been refuted by Tyge O'Keefe and a number of other historians. I wonder, could that be Ballymoon or Ballymoon out on the Castle Dermot side?
Yeah, it could. There are variations in spelling, you see, and for example, for many years, many people thought they had identified the site, say, of Ballyhogue, but it was actually Billy Colfer who was able to establish that definitively a few years ago for us. So there are, Tyge O'Keefe isn't an historian, he's an archaeologist. I'd like just to make that point. And his work is excellent, but as I said, and I accept what he says there about that property, but we aren't quite sure. We need to investigate further. Is it Ballymoon, or is it Ballymahon, or is it some other pronunciation? Where is it? But certainly there was a Templar property. The Templars didn't always have castles, I might add, many times just manor houses. So not even a tower house. So it could be whatever. I think the jury is open on that particular question. But
Thanks
we would
much.
like to investigate further, and if anyone in the society would like to contact us about it, and we could maybe see what we can do to identify them more definitively. Mm-hmm.
Thanks very much. That's all the questions.
Okay. Thank you, John, and thank you for facilitating this presentation this evening as well. I now call on Paul Curran to propose a vote of thanks to Dr. Downey. Paul?
Sorry, hello, can you hear me? Paul
Yes.
Here. Sorry, yeah.
Paul.
Sorry. A fantastic presentation, absolutely. I have a huge interest in the Order of Malta myself, and have been in touch with Tom Hanley in relation to as well, looking after from 1945 on. I have a good collection of photographs, but I have to say the presentation was absolutely outstanding. Covered it right from day one, 1099, all the way up to 2021. Absolutely brilliant presentation. Credit to you. And on behalf of Chaz, the full group, I'd like to, congratulate you and thank you very much for your presentation. And well done, absolutely well done.
Thank you, Paul. And just before we finish, maybe a little bit of housekeeping. May I call on Helen Doyle, our PRO, maybe to tell us something about future lectures.
Hello everyone. So next month we have another very interesting lecture. It's the Black Stairs Mountain region and illustrated history, and this lecture will be presented by Dr. Kevin Whelan. And I just want to let everyone know that this lecture will take place on the 24th of March, a week later than the usual date due to St. Patrick's Day.
If I may, I just want to express my sincere gratitude and appreciation to all of you in the Carlow Archaeological and Historical Society, and also particularly to John and Helen for your work in the logistics and organizing the whole technology behind this to make it work so smoothly and comfortably for me and for everyone this evening. And also I'd like to thank you, Richard, and you, Paul, for your very kind words. And I really do appreciate it. And I hope that it won't be too long before my confrere Tom Hanley can come and show you the exhibition, because the Carlow unit of the order has done magnificent work over the last 65, 66 years now. And it would be a wonderful celebration of care in the community by a volunteer organization working in the community, and an organization that has deep roots going back centuries in the community. So well done, Carlow.
Thank you, Declan. We've been very privileged to have you this evening, and I'd like to echo Paul's words and thank you again for being with us. I think that's all we have to deal with this evening. So I want to thank you all for attending in this Zoom era, and thank you for your support. I wish you all a very good evening, and look forward to next month's lecture. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.